Nothing can strike fear into your heart like seeing the unmistakable blue and red flashing lights of a police car flagging you down. Your mind races with all the possible things it could be for. Had you been speeding? Perhaps a taillight was out? Pushing the terror down, you smile your most innocent smile and prepare to talk. Once you have made your way to the side of the road, there is little chance of you leaving without a ticket. But this wasn't the case for William Jasinski at all. He was a war veteran, just minding his own business while driving down the road when suddenly he was pulled over for no good reason he could think of. William grew up in Somers, New York and studied at Arlington High School. Since he was a boy, he had wanted to serve his country and dreamed of becoming a sergeant one day. He expressed his desire to join the U.S. Army when he was only 10 years old. Naturally, his mother was concerned, and she had every right to be. William's chance to fulfill his dreams came in 2003, during the Iraq War. He was among the 177,194 troops who were sent into the war zone. Leaving his girlfriend, family, and indeed his entire life as he knew it behind, he prepared for the worst. His family waited for him, praying that he wouldn't be one of the 4,000 who never made it home. Thankfully, William was sent home after just a year of service. But he returned a changed man. The things he had seen in the war made such an impact on him that he just couldn't resume his normal life. His family convinced him to seek counseling, and it seemed to be helping, at first. But William just couldn't shake the shadow that seemed to follow him everywhere he went. That is, until a strange encounter on a lonely road gave him the jolt he needed. After his last lackluster counseling session, Williams began the long drive home to his home in La Forge, Texas. With his eyes on the white line, he put his body into autopilot and let his mind wander. He was thinking of his daughter at home, and his wife. If it weren't for them, well, he didn't even want to think about that. That's when he registered that the car behind him had been following him for some time now. His eyes flew to the odometer and he breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that he wasn't traveling over the speed limit by mistake. And he had checked that his lights were in working order the previous day, so the police had no reason to be following him. Perhaps he was just being paranoid, he reassured himself. But the little voice in his mind egged him on, just to be sure. William saw his opportunity up ahead and indicated at the last possible minute. He quickly geared down and turned off onto a quieter road, watching the cop car intently in his rearview mirror. Sure enough, the car came into view again over the rise. He knew he was being followed. Any minute now, he knew he'd hear the warning siren he had been waiting for. But what followed only unnerved him more. William's nerves were fraying and he was starting to panic, waiting for the siren that never came. From his years of military training, he knew that knowing what's coming is less nerve-wracking than the waiting. 5 minutes passed, and still nothing. No speaker, no sirens, just him in the cop car following him silently on an empty road. Suddenly, he saw the flash of blue and was almost relieved. That was the sign. The cop wanted him to pull over, which he'd do. Then, he'd go through the motions. License presented, some chit-chat, and then he'd be on his way. Or so he thought. William, slowing and pulling onto the verge, had no idea that this strange encounter was about to become a lot stranger. William's day began to get a little weird when he rolled down his window to ask the officer outside what the matter seemed to be. And when the officer said that he actually wasn't in any trouble and hadn't done anything to break the law, William noticed that his eyes had moved to the dashboard of his car, coming to rest on something they both held dear. William was a former heavy-wheeled vehicle operator for the U.S. Army. He also served in Iraq. So when he saw that the police officer was looking at the American flag that he kept there for remembrance, he never expected what happened next to unfold. It began with the officer simply wanting to give thanks, but it became so much more. After the usual chit-chat, the officer finally opened up about why he was so grateful to the war vet. He began by asking about Williams's time over there and slowly it unfolded. The story that the unnamed officer told him had a strong connection to everything that William had been through. And soon William would know everything. The veteran prominently displays 2 symbols from his time in the military on his car. One is an army sticker on his bumper and the other is the American flag which the officer had been drawn to. It was the sticker that alerted him to who was driving the car. Only then could he see who was inside. Who he saw astonished him. It was almost too much for him to bear. William told the officer a bit about his trip. I went to Iraq. I did a 15-month stint out of Fort Benning. And that's when everything started spilling out. The officer, in turn, told William some news that was still haunting him to this very day. And seeing William only brought up more unresolved pain. My son went to Iraq. He didn't make it home. Knowing the pain and having been there firsthand, William offered his condolences and, also, his help. "I'm so sorry to hear that. I just finished a PTSD program." PTSD is short for post-traumatic stress disorder, something not uncommon among military men and women. "I see you have a flag in the truck. The one we got for him. It's at the house," and just like that, the officer asked him a question, or a favor, that William simply couldn't refuse. "Can I ask a question? Would you mind stepping out and receiving a hug? You remind me of my son. You look exactly like him. When I pulled you over it was because you looked so much like him. I thought you were my son. I still don't believe he's gone most days," the officer said with tears in his eyes. So did William hug the officer? You had better believe it. According to his Facebook post, it wasn't just any old hug either. "With tears in both our eyes I got out and hugged that man. I'm talking about for a minute or two crying. Down to our knees crying. I needed that," William wrote. Both men seemed to release some grief. With a total stranger. At that moment, William felt himself let go of something that he'd been holding onto for so long. It was as if the hug from the policeman had dissolved William's fears and trauma. He almost felt it evaporate and rise up into the ether as both men stood on that empty road, hugging and crying. It was exactly the release he had needed. It was that heartfelt moment of human contact with a total stranger that had healed his PTSD far more than any counseling session could. He couldn't wait to go home to his wife and daughter and tell them everything. If you enjoyed this story, wait for our next story starting in 10 seconds. She sighed. The children were growing hungrier and more irritable by the second. Any minute now, she knew all hell was about to break loose. She flagged a passing waitress, but before she could open her mouth to speak, Maddie, her youngest, began to shriek. Kate Bradford, a single mother of two, was no stranger to the difficulties of finding a family-friendly restaurant. But at last, she had found the perfect diner. Tonight was her father's birthday and they had wanted to celebrate with a steak dinner, so she made a reservation for a booth at 6 p.m. at the Texas Roadhouse, just a few blocks from her home. What could possibly go wrong? Kate, as any mother of young children would, was experiencing immense anxiety over the impending restaurant trip. She had read the horror stories written by mothers and the venom spewed by childless diners in blogs and reviews, but she had the foresight to prepare for any eventuality in advance. Or so she thought. Armed with a diaper bag, crayons, puzzles, toys, and other distractions, Kate arrived at the Texas Roadhouse with trepidation 3 and 6-year-old in tow. They were 15 minutes early but were hoping to be seated immediately. The diner didn't look too busy, Kate noted with relief. Cole and Maddie were already growing restless, and Kate was already starting to regret her decision. The hostess greeted them with a smile, but when she saw the two small children she frowned. Kate's nerves were raw with tension and she was waiting for the worst: a snide comment, a judging look, anything, and she was ready to retaliate. They had just as much right to be here as anybody else, she kept telling herself. "We have a reservation," Kate said, cracking a smile. The hostess looked her name up in the book and guided them to the waiting area and apologized, saying that they were a little early and would have to wait for a table to become available. "Fair enough," Kate said in dismay as Cole started to clench his fists. "I'm hungry, Mommy," he whined. "We can't eat without Grandpa anyway, honey," she reasoned gently. The bar area was packed with men that night, and there was a big game on TV. Kate lifted Cole and then Maddie onto the high bar stools at a table in the corner, as far away from the noise as possible. She hoped they wouldn't have to wait long. Cole swung his legs repeatedly, kicking the table with his sneakers. 10 minutes of waiting turned into 15, and Kate was about to lose her patience. Kate scanned the faces jostling through the crowded bar. Her father, Joel, was late. She picked up her phone and dialed his number, but there was no answer, and she started to worry. Cole and Maddie held their birthday gifts, and Cole started to fidget. Then, he looked up and stated matter-of-factly that he needed to use the bathroom. But when Kate accompanied him to the restroom, it became all too clear that the hostess had lied to her. There were diners in all the booths, except one, in the far corner. At first, Kate thought that there must have been some kind of mistake, but then she started to fume. Why wouldn't the Roadhouse let them have the booth? They advertised themselves as a family restaurant when they clearly weren't. That's when Kate snapped the picture that took Facebook by storm. Turning to the nearest waitress, she asked why they had been waiting for all this time when there was a booth available. But just then Maddie started to have a toddler meltdown of epic proportions. She stamped her feet and started to shriek, and Kate had finally had enough. "There is an empty booth. I'll show you," Kate snapped. This wasn't the first time she had endured terrible service because she had disruptive children, but this was really just too much. She got up and started to lead the confused server to the dining area, and pointed triumphantly. Right there, in the corner. The waitress stammered, bewildered, plates of steaming food sat poised on her arms. Kate had blindsided her with her confrontation. She was just doing her job. She started to explain, but as Kate drew closer, she felt her smug face fall as she realized her terrible mistake. The table was unoccupied, but it wasn't empty. The table had been reserved for some VIP guests. At first, Kate was confused. Was there some sort of conspiracy going on here? Places had been set, it seemed, but the guests hadn't arrived. She was right to be annoyed. It was reserved for ghosts. But then, Kate's stomach started to turn as she took it all in. It was a lonely table. At that moment, Kate wished that the ground would open up and swallow her. Here she was, complaining, while she sat and waited for a table so she could have a steak dinner with her family. The gravity of the situation hit home as she understood how lucky she was. Her problems were small. Something terrible had happened to these men who were supposed to be in that booth tonight. The table was neatly set for 5, and there was a vase in the middle of the table that held a miniature American flag. There was also a full-sized flag hanging on the wall, lit by a single candle. It was an eerily forlorn sight, and Kate's heart filled with sadness when she realized what it all meant. There was a letter, typed and framed upright, and when Kate read the words, her heart broke. Kate's eyes filled with tears as she realized that the party of 5 who the table had been meticulously set for was not going to walk into the doors of the Texas Roadhouse anytime soon. Her face flushed with shame, and she knew that this particular group of men was never going to be able to enjoy the diner's trademark ribeye steak, ever again. The framed text read, "We remember and honor the 5 slain police officers, Sergeant Michael J. Smith, Officer Michael Kroll, Officer Patrick Zamaripa, Senior Corporal Lorne Aarons, and Mr. Brent Thompson, who worked for the Dallas Area Rapid Transit Police Department, that the Texas Roadhouse restaurant reserved a table for. We thank you for your service. May you rest in peace." Kate's father, Joel, arrived and found Kate standing motionless at the memorial table. Cole and Maddie were also quiet for once, as if somehow understanding the somber tone of their mother's discovery. Joel apologized to his daughter for being late, and just then a waitress walked up with a smile. "Bradford, party of 4? Your booth is ready." At their freshly cleared table, Kate sat in silence as she thought about what she had just seen. She knew in the back of her mind that there had been some sort of tragedy, but she hadn't been paying attention. Then she turned to her father and asked, "Who are the Dallas 5? The table had been set for the Dallas 5 brave police officers who had died while in the line of duty. The incident was deemed the most deadly for law enforcement since 9/11. The tragedy occurred on July 7, 2016. A man named Micah Xavier Johnson had ambushed and fired upon a group of police officers in Dallas, Texas. Micah Xavier Johnson killed 5 officers and injured 9 others. 2 civilians were also wounded. Johnson was an Army Reserve Afghan war veteran who was outraged over police shootings, and this drove him to commit the atrocity. But there was one restaurant that was not going to let these policemen's brave efforts go unnoticed. The Texas Roadhouse, in addition to the heartbreaking tribute table, donated 5% of all sales on that memorable day to the Assist the Officer Foundation, run by the Dallas Police Association. This organization provides assistance to officers and their families in the event of illness, accidents, and other events that lead to loss of income. But it's not the first table of honor the restaurant chain has laid. In fact, the family restaurant chain has made an impression on many of its diners with similar tribute tables. Kate's photos, as well as others, have been circulating on social media, and thousands have commended the touching gesture with positive comments. One Facebook user wrote, "I've even seen Wounded Warrior reserved parking spaces at the restaurant in Altoona, PA. They are by far my favorite restaurant, not just for the great food, but the patriotism and professionalism they constantly show. Texas Roadhouse where I live reserved a table for the 2 firefighters who were killed in the line of duty by an arson fire. One of those firefighters was my brother-in-law," another Facebook user wrote. "He left behind a wife and 4 daughters, plus countless family and friends. Thanks Texas Roadhouse." Some other Facebook users have spotted other tribute tables as well, the empty table. They had it set up in the canteen at Iowa City, Virginia Hospital when I was there Friday. "Happy Veterans Day, Leroy. So poignant, and God bless Texas Roadhouse for saving this table even though they were so busy." The Texas Roadhouse chain has also been known for honoring fallen officers and veterans alike, with reserved tables and discounted meals at all their branches across America. They really go the extra mile to display compassion and patriotism, even if it affects their bottom line. We need to give credit where it's due. It's easy to take things for granted in life, like being able to enjoy a night out with loved ones while eating a delicious meal. Sometimes we forget just how much dedicated public servants do to protect America's citizens, and how much they risk each and every day putting their lives on the line. Texas Roadhouse's beautiful tributes remind us to stop and say, thank you.